It was a sweltering summer night in a small town in the American Midwest, where the deserted streets seemed to echo the untold stories of people who had lived there. A gentle breeze rustled the curtains of an old house on the corner of a dimly lit street. Inside, Layla sat on the edge of her bed, gazing at the wedding dress she never wanted to wear. That white dress symbolized something far removed from her dreams, a forced marriage to a man she would never have chosen. Layla knew she had no choice. Her family obligations came first, and the traditions of her culture prevented her from questioning them. The pressure from her family to marry someone of high status was almost suffocating. But that night, something inside her rebelled. She didn't want to be just a piece in a game she hadn't chosen. She didn't want to become part of a destiny imposed upon her. As she contemplated her escape, a soft sound from the window made her pause for a moment. She peered through the gap in the curtain and saw a silhouette approaching. Her heart raced. It was the Sheikh, but he was far from the man everyone thought he was. He wasn't there for convenience or self-interest. He, too, had something to lose. The Sheikh, a powerful and hardened man, stood there in the darkness of the night, watching her with the gaze of someone who knew that their destinies were about to intertwine in a way no one could have imagined. He had been warned about Layla's escape, but he didn't know that by getting involved, he too would be caught in a web of events that would change the course of their lives forever. What would happen that night, under the starlight, could not have been predicted. It was as if the universe had chosen that moment to reveal something that would transcend both of their imaginations. Layla grew up in a small town where tradition and her family's expectations shaped her future. The pressure to follow in her parents' footsteps was constant, and the idea of an arranged marriage was nothing new to her. Her mother always talked about how old-fashioned marriages were based on financial interests and power alliances. Although Layla had some freedom in the small things in her life, her future was sealed by this unsigned contract from her family, a promise of union between two influential families in the town. Layla's life had been a preparation for that moment. She studied to please everyone, made friends to seem integrated, but always felt a distance from what she truly desired. Her heart, however grateful she was for her family, yearned for something different. Her dream was to go to a big city, to explore the world beyond the limits that kept her trapped there. But in her culture, a dream like that was seen as a luxury, something unattainable for a young woman destined for marriage and motherhood. The Sheikh, on the other hand, was a distant figure to Layla, someone she had only heard of in whispered, admiring conversations. His presence at grand parties was always imposing, and everyone bowed to his authority. However, his power stemmed not only from his wealth or social status, but from the influence he wielded across all levels of society. In everyone's eyes, the Sheikh was a rigid, controlled man, always calculating his actions, and this meant that few dared to challenge his word. He had inherited the responsibility of maintaining his family's lineage with honor and wealth, but within his heart there was a profound loneliness, a pain he never shared. His marriage would be more of a political transaction than a union of hearts. And although he had accepted this reality for so many years, something inside him began to question the price he paid for remaining at the forefront of this tradition. When he heard about Layla's marriage, something inexplicable stirred within him. He found himself drawn not only to her beauty, but to the idea of freedom she represented, a freedom he also desired for himself. In the weeks leading up to the wedding day, the Sheikh began observing Layla from afar, trying to understand who she truly was. He realized she wasn't like the other women he knew. She had something pure and, at the same time, defiant in her gaze. Something within him felt her like an extinguished flame in a field of ashes. He knew she was running away, but instead of acting to stop her, something made him want her to succeed. Perhaps it was the very humanity she exuded, the courage he so desperately longed for himself. That night, When Layla took her first step toward freedom, she didn't know she was crossing an invisible line between what she was and what she could be. She fled the house where she grew up, her wedding dress still tied around her, and ran down the dark road without looking back. The biting night wind enveloped her as she searched for a path she didn't know, but where she felt she could be who she truly was. Each step she took was like an echo in the darkness, a silent call to an uncertain future. But when she reached the main road, something made her hesitate. The light of a car appeared in the distance, illuminating the night with an unexpected glow. She stopped for a moment, feeling a strange sensation of being watched. It was the Sheikh. He had followed her movements from the window of that house, and seeing her flee, something compelled him to go after her. Perhaps it was the impulse to help her, or perhaps the desire to control the situation. But seeing her ahead, his reason faltered for a moment. He approached in his car and stopped beside her, the headlights illuminating her sweaty and anxious face. "You know you can't do this, don't you?" His voice sounded firm, but with a slight hesitation. She looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of determination and fear. "I don't want to get married," she said, her voice trembling, but strong enough for him to understand the gravity of her words. The Sheikh hesitated. He knew the weight of her words, the weight of the entire destiny he carried on his shoulders, but he couldn't simply let her go. Not only because he needed her to fulfill his family's expectations, but also because something inside him was urging him to stop her, without knowing exactly why. "You have a destiny, Layla. You can't run from it," he said, but the way he spoke sounded more like an internal dilemma than an order. Layla stared at him with a look that was a mixture of anger and frustration. "You don't understand," she replied. "I have no choice, but you do. I see the prison in your eyes. You want to escape too, don't you?" These words cut the Sheikh in a way he couldn't understand. He was used to being seen as an imposing figure, someone everyone feared and respected, but no one had ever challenged him in such a direct, genuine way. And there was Layla, a reflection of everything he also desired: freedom, the chance to live life without the shadow of traditions that suffocated him. However, he knew she couldn't simply be left to go her own way. The pressure from family and the obligations he carried were relentless forces. At the same time, he also knew that if he let her go, something inside him would die. "You can go, or I can help you find a new path," he said, his voice choked with inner turmoil. Layla looked at him, speechless, her mind racing. What she wanted was freedom, but she also knew she couldn't escape so easily. The dilemma forming between them was more than a simple choice. It was a battle between the destinies that had been imposed upon them both and the desire to break those chains. And as the Sheikh gazed at her, he knew that what would happen next would change the course of their lives forever. While Layla and the Sheikh were on the verge of a crucial decision, the world around them was in turmoil. Layla's escape affected not only her and the Sheikh, but an entire system of beliefs and expectations that permeated her family and community. When Layla walked out the front door, no one imagined she would ever have the courage to break the rules that had always bound her. But, contrary to everyone's expectations, she was able to defy fate. Layla's family was devastated. Her mother, a woman of strong convictions, saw her daughter's escape as a public disgrace, a betrayal not only of the family but of all women who followed tradition. Her father, a strict businessman, could not accept the idea that the family's honor was at stake. They were powerful people, and Layla's escape was a sign of disobedience they could not tolerate. So they began sending people to find her, promising rewards and punishments to whoever brought her back. The pressure on the runaway girl grew with each passing minute. Meanwhile, the Sheikh was also facing challenges. His involvement in Layla's escape was not being well received by his own family. He was expected to follow traditions and continue the legacy that had been planned for him since birth. His participation in helping Layla was not only a betrayal of his own culture, but also a risk to the stability of his family empire. He knew that by getting involved with her, he was creating a series of consequences that would affect his position and his future. However, there was an additional layer to this dilemma. The Sheikh was becoming increasingly captivated by Layla's courage and strength. He saw her as a woman who, despite everything, remained true to herself, and this touched him in a way he never imagined possible. He was falling in love with someone who not only defied conventions, but also made him question his own life. As Layla and the Sheikh found themselves increasingly connected, the world around them began to crumble. The consequences of their escape were creating cracks in the foundations of their families. For Layla, the escape was a chance to find freedom, but for the Sheikh, it was an existential dilemma to follow his family or to choose what his heart was beginning to desire. He knew that, alongside Layla, he would also be breaking his own chains. However, the weight of that decision was becoming heavier with each passing moment. He needed to deal with the pressure from his family and at the same time understand what was happening to him. He had been prepared to be a strong leader, someone who controlled his life with firmness and certainty, but Layla had put all of that at risk. Now he no longer knew whether he wanted to fulfill his destiny or risk everything for her. And somewhere, in the shadows, someone was watching their every move. The situation was about to change, and the consequences of Layla and the Sheikh's actions would reverberate far beyond what they imagined. The air was heavy the night the Sheikh and Layla met again. They had strayed from familiar paths, heading towards the unknown. Layla knew that the decision to continue the escape or not would change her life forever. But she didn't know that this moment would also irreversibly change the Sheikh's life. It was a cold night when Layla, sitting on the edge of a small lake, reflected on everything that had happened. The city lights, distant on the horizon, seemed a reminder of everything she had left behind, and the fear of what might happen next consumed her. She didn't want to be just a woman who ran away from marriage. She wanted to be more. But at the same time, she knew that her escape was putting the lives of those around her at risk, including the Sheikh. As she gazed at the dark waters, she sensed a presence. She didn't need to look to know it was the Sheikh. He had always known where she was, as if he had an invisible connection with her. He approached silently, as he always did, but this time there was something different about him. He no longer had the rigid posture of before, the imposing man she knew. There was something vulnerable in his eyes, an anguish she couldn't identify. "You were right," he said, his voice heavy with unexpected sadness. "I'm trapped too, Layla. Trapped by my own life, by what I thought was destiny." Layla looked at him, unsure what to say. She had always seen him as someone strong, untouchable, but now he stood before her in a human form, someone with flaws, with insecurities. She had never imagined that the Sheikh, the figure of authority, could feel something so profound. "I'm not who everyone thinks I am," he continued. "I was trained to be the man my family wanted, but I never felt at peace with that. When I saw you, I saw in you the same struggle I face every day, and now I don't know if I can continue living this lie." The shock on Layla's face was evident. She had never known that the Sheikh, with all his grandeur, could be so vulnerable. But before she could say anything, he took a step forward, closer to her. Their eyes met, and, for a brief moment, the world around them disappeared. It was as if they were alone, each seeing in the other the pain they were hiding. "There's something you need to know, Layla," the Sheikh said, his voice deeper, almost a whisper. "I wasn't the only one who grew up under the weight of expectations. My family, they have secrets. And I'm part of something that goes far beyond a simple arranged marriage." Layla looked at him, confused. "Secrets? What are you trying to tell me?" The sheikh gazed at the horizon, his face etched with tension. Marriage. It's not just about you and me. There's something much bigger at stake, something you don't know. They forced me to accept this for too long, and now I fear I've brought you into something far more dangerous than we imagined. Before Layla could react, the distant sound of a car made them stop. Something was happening. Their future, which seemed to be in their hands, was now at stake in a way they never imagined. She looked at him, her eyes full of questions. What do you mean by that? What's going on? The sheikh silently pointed to the approaching car. The look in his eyes revealed that their story was about to take a turn no one could have predicted. The car stopped abruptly a few meters from where Layla and the sheikh were. The sound of the engine shutting off signaled that something big was about to happen. Layla looked at the sheikh, her eyes filled with uncertainty. He no longer seemed like the self-assured man she knew, but someone lost in a sea of dilemmas. Fear was evident in his gaze. The sheikh glanced at the car, a visible tension in his shoulders. He hadn't wanted Layla involved in this game, but the consequences of his decision to help her were now about to reach an uncontrollable speed. "They came after me," he said, without turning around. "I should have seen this coming." Before he could finish, the car door opened, and out stepped a familiar figure. It was the sheikh's brother Omar, whom he never expected to find there. Omar had always been his family's trusted man, his father's right-hand man, and the last person the sheikh wanted to get involved with at that moment. "Omar?" the sheikh asked, his voice tense. "What are you doing here?" His brother looked at him with a cold smile. "Do you really think you can get away with this? Do you think you can betray our family and get away with it?" Layla felt a shiver run down her spine when she saw Omar's imposing posture. She knew it was much more than a simple threat. It was a promise of revenge, something only people with power like his could offer. The sheikh took a deep breath, trying to remain calm, but the situation was out of control. "I'm not running away, Omar. I'm just trying to understand what really matters. I don't want to continue with this life, with the lies. I can't continue with this. I can't be who you want me to be anymore." Omar laughed, a sound that seemed more like a bitter chuckle than a genuine reaction. "Do you think your choice will change anything? You're trapped, brother. We all are. There's no way out." Layla looked at the sheikh, her eyes now more intense than ever. She felt the pressure mounting in her chest, the weight of the words Omar had just spoken. She knew she was in danger, but she also knew the sheikh was no longer the same person she had known. He was struggling with himself, and this could be her chance to help him. "I'm not part of this," she said, her voice firm, her heart still racing. "I'm not going to be a pawn in this game. I just want my freedom." Omar looked at her with disdain. "Freedom? Do you really think you have the luxury of choice here? You're gambling with the fate of your own future, girl." The sheikh, for the first time, looked at Layla with admiration. He knew she was right. She wasn't just a woman fleeing a marriage. She was fighting for her own life, her own identity, and the freedom he was also beginning to crave. But his dilemma was still there, etched in his mind. How could he help her without destroying everything he had built up until then? Omar noticed the silent exchange between the two, and his expression hardened. "I won't let you leave here in peace. You have a choice, but it's already been made. Now, all that remains is what our family will decide for you." The tension in the air was palpable. The sheikh knew the next few minutes would be crucial. He couldn't turn back now. He could no longer hide behind the facade his family forced him to maintain. He looked at Layla one last time before taking a step forward. "If I lose everything because of this, Layla, then I'd rather lose with you by my side than live a lie." What Layla and the sheikh were about to experience could not be resolved with words or quick decisions. The escape, which seemed to be the answer to their freedom, now revealed itself as a far more complex journey than they had imagined. Each step they took away from what they knew brought them closer to something unknown and dangerous. They were no longer just running from the expectations of others. They were running from themselves, from the limits they had imposed on their own lives. The road they took led them to a remote village, far from those powerful families and the weight of tradition. The mountains in the background, shrouded in morning mist, offered a stark contrast to the bustling city they had fled. But here, in a completely new world, the Sheikh felt more lost than ever. His power, his position, everything he had achieved seemed insignificant compared to what he now desired, to be free. Layla, on the other hand, still carried the weight of her past. The pain of being rejected by her own family, of seeing the doors of her old world closing, was something she couldn't simply let go of. But looking at the Sheikh, she began to understand that he didn't have all the answers either. He was as lost as she was. "You never imagined your life could be different, did you?" Layla asked, her voice calm but laden with a depth she didn't yet fully comprehend. The Sheikh looked at her, his eyes filled with inner conflict. I never knew how to be anyone else. I was raised to be who everyone expected me to be. I always saw myself as a pillar, someone who has to keep everything in balance. But now, the only thing I know is that I need something more." The confusion on his face was evident. He had everything any man could want: wealth, status, respect. But in the presence of Layla, he began to question all of that. For him, the journey wasn't just about escaping the prison his family represented, but about understanding who he was, without all the layers of authority and expectations that had been placed upon him. Layla approached him, gently touching his arm. "Sometimes the greatest challenge isn't escaping what binds us, but who we think we are." These words struck the Sheikh deeply. He had never considered the possibility that his true prison was the version of himself he had created. He always saw himself as the leader, the protector, the one who could not fail. But now, facing Layla, he was beginning to realize that he too needed to learn to free himself from his own expectations. And it was at that moment that something inside him broke. He looked at Layla, and for the first time in his life he felt an unexpected clarity. It no longer mattered what his family thought or what the world expected of him. What mattered was what he would choose to be. "I've never been free," he said, his voice low but full of newfound determination. "But perhaps I can learn what that means now." Layla smiled, a gentle yet powerful expression. "I don't know what the future holds for us either, but I know that if we're going to face it, we must do it together." The Sheikh stepped back for a moment, gazing at the horizon. Layla's words still echoed in his mind. He knew their journey was far from over, but now he was ready to face it in a different way. He was no longer a man of status or power. He was simply someone trying to find his own path. Layla, for her part, also began to change. She was no longer the young woman fleeing a marriage, but a woman taking control of her own life. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but by the Sheikh's side, she felt she could face anything. She no longer feared the shadows of the past, because now she knew she had the power to define her own destiny. They knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, but also of discoveries. Together, they would learn that true freedom was not about escaping, but about confronting the limitations they had imposed on themselves and the world around them. Whatever the future held, they were now ready to face it. The days that followed were marked by growing tension. Layla and the Sheikh hid in the mountains, far from the city and the pressure from their families. But despite being physically distant from everything they knew, the weight of their choices still haunted them. They knew they couldn't stay there forever. With each passing day, it became harder to keep the secret of their escape, harder to avoid the inevitable confrontation with the forces that tried to force them back to their old lives. The pressure was at its peak when the Sheikh finally admitted to himself that he couldn't remain hidden forever. His family, his allies, everyone was looking for them, and the network of influence he had tried to escape was closing in more and more. He knew he couldn't run anymore, but before he faced what his family had in store for him, he needed to make a definitive choice about who he was and what he was willing to lose. Layla, for her part, felt the weight of her own decisions. She knew that at some point she would have to return home and face her family, but now there was a growing strength within her, something she had never imagined feeling. Fear was being replaced by courage, and the need to be free was taking shape in a way she had never conceived. She knew that her future was not in someone else's hands, and if the Sheikh was willing to face his destiny, she would face hers as well. But the danger was much closer than they imagined. While Layla and the Sheikh discussed their next steps, a message arrived, bringing an unexpected threat. Layla's family not only wanted to bring her back, but were now willing to do anything to ensure she was brought back by force. The war of nerves was about to begin. "If you don't return by the end of the week, they'll make you return, Layla," the Sheikh said, his eyes reflecting genuine concern. "They're no longer just concerned about the wedding, but about our family's honor. They won't wait any longer." Layla looked at him with an intensity he had never seen before. She knew there was no turning back now. The game had changed, and so had she. She was no longer a young woman running from the destiny imposed upon her. She was a woman willing to fight for what she believed in, even if it meant losing everything. The Sheikh was about to stand up and leave to confront his family when Layla grabbed his arm, stopping him. "If we're going to do this, we're going to do it together. We can't let them divide us. No matter what happens, I'm with you." The Sheikh looked at her, surprised. He had underestimated her strength, but now he knew she was as ready as he was to face the consequences of her choices. They were no longer victims of an imposed fate. They were the architects of their own future. But reality was unforgiving. With each passing minute, the dangers became more concrete. Layla's family, with their vast network of influence, was closing in. The Sheikh knew that war was about to begin, and now he was fighting not only for his freedom, but for Layla's freedom as well. They had one last chance to prevent chaos. The Sheikh's allies, those few who were still on his side, had begun to position themselves, but the pieces were on the board, and tensions were becoming unsustainable. Night fell with a palpable tension in the air, as if the universe itself were waiting for a decision. Layla and the Sheikh were closer than ever, but what would unfold next was beyond anything they could have foreseen. The battle was about to begin. The sky was tinged red when the Sheikh and Layla arrived at the meeting place. Time seemed to stand still, the pressure of a silent war building in the air. There in the distant mountains, far from the laws and order of their families, they were about to face what they feared: the consequences of their choices. The arrival of the Sheikh's family and Layla's allies, who had been sent to find them, indicated that the confrontation would not only be physical, but also psychological. The forces were in position, and their future depended not only on their actions, but also on the courage to face what fate had in store for them. The Sheikh, with his usual haughty posture, but with the determined look of someone ready to fight for his freedom, turned to Layla. He had waited for this moment his whole life, but he never imagined it would be with her by his side. "Whatever happens now, we know we did the right thing," he said, his voice deep, but with a hint of regret. Without hesitation, Layla shook his hand. "We are the masters of our own destiny, Sheikh. We will not let anyone define us anymore." The sound of horses echoed in the distance, and soon they saw the shadows of imposing figures approaching. Layla's family was there, her father at the front, his expression hard and uncompromising. He looked at her with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "You have no idea what you've done, Layla. Running away was a mistake, a disgrace to us all. You're destroying everything your mother and I built." The sheikh stepped forward, positioning himself beside Layla, shielding her with his body. It's not a matter of building, but of destroying the chains that imprison our souls. Layla did nothing wrong, my lord. The mistake was trying to force a destiny that doesn't belong to her. Layla's father looked at him with disdain. You, a powerful man, are defending the shame of our family because of a woman who thinks she can do whatever she wants. That's an insult. But the sheikh was unfazed. He knew that words wouldn't be enough to change what was happening. He wasn't there to argue. He was there to confront the truth that they were no longer the figures their families wanted them to be, but rather individuals who had chosen to fight for what they believed in. Layla, her heart racing but overflowing with courage, stepped forward. You taught me, Father, that a woman's worth lies not in her obedience, but in her ability to make her own choices. And I choose to be free. Those words seemed to cut through the air with the force of a sharp blade. Layla's father, his jaw clenched, finally took a step back, as if those words had struck him in a way he hadn't expected. He didn't know how to respond, but he wasn't the only one present. Among the allies, a familiar face appeared. Omar, the sheikh's brother. He watched from afar, his eyes cold, but with a new light of understanding. He knew the sheikh wouldn't yield. Not now. But something within him seemed to have changed. The imposing man he had been trained to be was beginning to understand true power, the power of choice. The tension in the air grew even thicker when suddenly a shout cut through the silence. One of Layla's family men, determined to force her back, lunged at her. But before he could reach Layla, the sheikh was quicker. He stopped him with a swift movement, pushing him aside. No one will touch her, he said, his voice firm. At that moment, everything seemed to be at risk. The fight was about to begin, and the consequences of this battle would be definitive. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. Omar, who until then had been observing as a spectator, stepped forward and raised his hand. Enough, he said, in a tone of voice that everyone recognized. The fight isn't about who wins or loses. It's about how we choose to live our lives. And today, I choose to let go of what has been imposed on me. The sheikh's eyes narrowed, surprised by his brother's statement. Omar, you? Omar looked at him, his gaze serious but determined. Yes, I saw what you're doing, and now I see what's right. You two are seeking what we should all be seeking, freedom. I can no longer be a part of it, but I won't stop you from finding your way either. The impact of those words was immense. The sheikh looked at Layla, and for a moment the tension eased. They had won an important victory, but not on the battlefield. They had won freedom, choice. Layla's father finally shook his head, defeated. He could no longer deny that his daughter had made the right choice. Dawn arrived slowly, tinging the sky with gold and orange hues, while the echoes of the battle still resonated in everyone's minds. The confrontation had ended, but the scars it left would be permanent. For Layla and the sheikh, the journey they began in the shadows of traditions and expectations imposed by their families had come to an end. But what would come next would be a new life, a new beginning. Layla felt a peace she never imagined she could achieve. When she looked at the sheikh beside her, now more human than ever, she knew that together they had won more than a simple battle. They had conquered fear, the pressure of a destiny they didn't belong to, and now they were free to write their own story, a story of love, of overcoming, and of choices. Her father's decision to finally accept her freedom, though bitter, brought with it a sense of relief. He had never fully accepted her choices, but the words she had spoken, about how her freedom was her right, silencing him. He knew he could no longer force her to fit into a mold that wasn't hers. He knew that, although he hadn't understood what motivated his daughter, she was now the master of her own destiny. The sheikh, in turn, saw in his own eyes a transformation he had never imagined. He had been raised to be someone he wasn't, but with Layla by his side, he now knew who he truly was. He was no longer the heir to an empire. He was no longer a prisoner of his own life. He was a free man, capable of choosing his own path, just as Layla had chosen hers. Together, they left the city that had once imprisoned them, heading towards an uncertain future, but one full of possibilities. The weight of traditions and others' expectations no longer hung over them. They were going to a place where they could truly be themselves, unconstrained. And for the first time, Layla felt that the future was hers to build, not something others had planned for her. The sheikh's words echoed in her mind, and she smiled. "No matter what happens now, Layla, I am free, and so are you." They walked together, hand in hand, toward the horizon. And as the sun rose, bringing a new light to the world, Layla knew that although the path ahead was challenging, they were ready to face it. Because now they had learned that true freedom lay not in escape, but in choice, and together they chose to live.